in terms of national security, are there things you could say now that perhaps you couldn't say then about impending national security issues and world conflict scenario here?
Is there a world conflict in terms of like World War III? Well, I mean, that scenario does not sound improbable to me.
Just yesterday, the UN Secretary General warned that
the current socio-environmental vulnerabilities need to be implemented.
The breadbasket of Europe.
Export situations, flexible
could be on the brink of an all-out civil war right now.
China is deploying troops to its first overseas military base in Djibouti.
Urban combat in Yemen.
A life science company, a deep position in long-term
now at their highest level in a decade, according to an index tracked by the UN.
We have a civilian logistic operation that operates
The importance of our food supply and security and safety cannot be underestimated.
I've covered stuff in the past that people told me I should be concerned about, that I should be watching my back. I did a story that exposed corrupt bankers that resulted in people losing millions of dollars and hating my guts.
She is.
I've gotten troves of secret information from within inside of Facebook that showed how employees talked about knowingly duping children out of money.
I'm gonna actually cut this.
Goodbye, Internet.
I have reported in Macau going out and drinking with the triad bosses. I was told they would dangle me out of my hotel room balcony and drop me.
It feels safe. How safe is it?
Pretty safe.
Yeah. This project has kept me up at night more than all of my other investigative reporting projects combined.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's okay.
Okay. Great. Cool. Are we ready?
Actually, let me just grab time rolling.
All right. Hi, I'm Nate Helverson, a reporter. I'll start over. Hi, I'm Nate Helverson, an Emmy Award-winning reporter and producer here at the Center for Investigative Reporting. We're the largest. It's difficult to say when I started on this project because this project sort of just started as one thing and then just sort of just like ate up 7 years of my life. I got a call one day and I was asked to look at this takeover of Smithfield Foods.
Smithfield, agreeing to be acquired by China's Shuangwei International for $30
This was the largest purchase of an American business by a Chinese company ever, and still is to date. And so when I started looking at the numbers, this was effectively 1 in 4 American pigs that the Chinese bought, essentially overnight.
I mean, did you expect that this committee would hold a hearing on the acquisition?
I don't know that I contemplated that, no.
Did you realize you were the victim of a Chinese communist plot?
Senator, I did not. To this moment, I'm not sure I understand. I'm the victim of a communist plot.
There was a lot of question even if the Chinese government was behind it, and if they were behind it, why? And I think it's that why that was concerning people. And they wanted to know, is another country making moves to control part of the American food supply?
Would you agree that Shuangwei is a state-controlled company?
No, I would not agree, Senator, that it is a state-controlled company. It is. I mean, I think that's fairly easy to research.
Larry Pope was the CEO of Smithfield Foods. He told Congress that he doesn't think the Chinese government is behind the takeover of his company. But I went to China. I flew to the Nebraska of China. I mean, I met with the president of Shuangwei.
Welcome to 双汇.
He gave me a tour of the factory. After that, I flew to Hong Kong to meet with more of the company's executives. I was given a big, thick book that very explicitly says, do not distribute in the United States, because it's full of information. And I mean, I took it back to the United States because it was full of information. Yeah, I mean, when people say follow the money, this is like literally following the money. This is getting the book that breaks down every single dollar of the largest ever Chinese purchase of an American company. Buried within this thing is like treasure. A lot of it's really boring, and then there'll be pure treasure. And so I knew that the Bank of China had arranged the financing of this deal. And the Bank of China is owned by the Chinese government. It's controlled and run by the Chinese government. And so I opened up their annual report, and smack dab in there is an entire page devoted to the takeover of Smithfield Foods. And it says that it does its, quote, social responsibility and is carrying out the national strategies of the government. So by the time I sat down with Larry Pope, I had the goods. All right? Yeah.
Larry, it is 1:15. Okay.
I just wanted you to...
Any more questions? Is there any other burning question I haven't asked?
Can I show you something really quick? I'm just going to show you the, this is the Bank of China document where they lay this out.
I didn't know they did it in 24 hours.
You can see here, I just mark it. I mean, they're saying that that transaction is part of the government's plan, and they're supporting it, and it's their social responsibility.
The bank performs its social responsibility. The bank spares no efforts to support Chinese enterprises in there. Wow.
Overnight, Wan Long, the chairman of WH Group, picked up the phone, made a call to the Bank of China, and the next day they had $5 billion. 1 in 4 American pigs.
All right. Thanks so much for the time.
Good luck.
It's just one deal. It was one deal. I was able to get to the bottom of it. The Chinese government was behind the deal.
The largest Chinese takeover.
You can turn on MSNBC, CNN, Fox Business News. You just keep seeing big food deal, big food deal. And then all of a sudden it kind of comes to me like, wait a minute, what are other countries doing this?
That's the scale of it. A vast leak of thousands of documents from US embassies and other diplomatic outposts.
So around this time, I start digging through WikiLeaks, which had dumped like 200,000 State Department cables online. I just start going through. I mean, there's 818 results. And I came across this classified cable, food security, agriculture getting spotlight. It was basically the embassy in Riyadh sending information back to the State Department, back to the US government, saying that King Abdullah is telling his companies to go overseas and buy up food and water resources. The cables, these classified cables, made it really clear this was a national security issue for Saudi Arabia. It wasn't just they were concerned about running out of water, they were running out of water. So there was like a time in the 90s when Saudi Arabia was the world's 6th largest exporter of wheat, a desert country pumping up its groundwater to grow wheat and export other places. And that didn't last. Saudi Arabia had drained so much water from their aquifers, they were nearly gone in 30 years, in a generation. And so King Abdullah had to say to his companies and to his nation, like, we got to go overseas and find our food and water. And that's the pattern. That's the pattern we're starting to see. One of the first things I stumbled upon was that Saudi Arabian company had bought effectively 15 square miles in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. This place, La Paz County.
About our basins here in La Paz County, and you know, so I'm grateful that we're able to keep it on the forefront, let them know that, you know what, we're a small county, but we matter, and stuff like that. So anyways, you guys enjoy your margaritas.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you.
I've heard from people, the residents, that they've gotten so frustrated that they've talked about taking their trucks, their off-road vehicles, and tearing up fields. I've heard them mention throwing bombs down their wells. The biggest farm is going to be Fondamonte, the Saudis, the Saudi Arabians. Their facility that they have is just huge. It's like their own little world. I didn't see this here a month ago. Here you have trucks that are being weighed, filled up with hay in the back, so they can ship the hay either to China, Saudi Arabia. I have no idea how many heads of cattle that they're feeding over there. All I know is that I've been told that that's what they're using their hay for. Sucking our water dry in order to grow hay so they can ship it overseas back to their country so they can feed their cows. We have the aquifers underneath this, and some of these pumps that they're installing can pump up to 3,500 gallons per minute. Millions and millions of gallons of water.
In a lot of these areas in Arizona, there's no regulation to how much water you can pump. You buy the land, free to pump as much water as you want. So this big Saudi Arabia and dairy company goes to Arizona and quickly becomes one of the largest water users in the state. And you know, what's happening is legal. It's pissing a lot of people off, but under current law, this is legal.
Yeah, my well went dry. It drew down because the water's dropping. There's not enough, rain that could replenish it. I mean, you couldn't replenish this in a lifetime,
When did you first notice the water problem?
Well, I guess that would have been the day when the water level went below my pump and the pump burned up and melted the casing, and yeah, that was a little disappointing. I think everybody knows the problem, but I don't know how to correct it. I can't pay for a high-powered lawyer, neither can any of my friends, and what good would it do anyway? You just take and take and take, and pretty soon there isn't anything to take.
Because these people are so upset. So when I say that, I feel her pain, I feel your pain. I was out all day today taking a look at the different farms again. I want conservation measures put in place so we can all grow as a community, where you guys can stay here and so can they.
You're saying it's perfectly legal for these people to come in here, drain the aquifer, and the local people have to re-drill their wells that they've lived there for years, and you say that's perfectly legal?
Tell us what's going to be done to improve the situation, because it's getting worse. I know that there's large tracts, miles and miles of green that wasn't there 2 years ago. How is that possible? I thought these protections are allowed to we homeowners here when our wells are running dry.
What we want to know is, what are you doing for us?
Where do we go?
Nathan Halverson is the first reporter to break this story in the national press, and he joins us now live. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
3, 2, 1.
In China, here outside of the small town.
Okay.
Yeah. Around me, literally the dirt underneath my tires is sinking.
What does it mean that you guys have built this brand new plant?
Wonderful smell of bacon that pulls you out of bed in the morning.
I was doing all of these pieces, right?
And that's it. I got nothing more. Fuck.
And I do a story about this thing over here and this thing here and this thing there, but I was beginning to connect all of those stories. We could see that other countries around the world were growing increasingly worried about food and water. And their strategies was to buy, purchase, grab other countries' food and water supplies. And so I began to think about, how is climate change going to impact, how countries grab food and water, and, the geopolitics of food and water. I mean, I began digging through the Paris Accord stuff, United Nations reports on climate change, and what became clear is it's going to impact countries very differently. And that's when I stumbled across Russia. The documents showed that Russia's food production was going to benefit from climate change. Imagine an area covered in white frost
slowly thawing out, and in its place comes up green crops shooting from the ground, followed by cattle and sheep and pigs. It kind of goes from a desert of cold to Iowa. So what is Russia going to do about that? Well, it turns out one of the things they're going to do about it is import American cowboys.
You know, my wife seen an ad on the internet, and as a joke, she thought it'd be funny as hell. So she put my resume in, and I was getting ready to watch Sunday football in Valentine, Nebraska, and this Skype thing come over to the computer, and I hollered at her, honey. She kind of got panicky and said, you need to talk to him, it's about a job. And so I answered it, and 30 minutes later, I was hired. Pretty much my wife didn't think that was very funny after all that, you know, because now we're packing up and going to Russia.
Oh, here we go. Hey, you guys better give him some air. Oh, he's tapped out, boys.
They don't have that in Russia. And they figured if they were going to do it right, what they needed was the guy in the cowboy hat with the chaps on the horse.
You know, in the United States already third or fourth generation cowboys, so they know all the details. They train the horse, and all the things with the lasso, with the handle and the cattle, how to protect from the wolves, how it's all the practical things, because we was like a babies, you know.
Yeah, we went there, we went to the Russian rodeo, government officials were in the stands, the head of the cattle companies were there. It was an amazing spectacle.
I think that means we are proud of growth of Russian agriculture of country. And this was the target for us. One of the target that, especially after the Soviet Union was broken, this what we was missing. Putin was very much motivated to do this, and he was very much enthusiastic. He visited our slaughterhouse, and after that he was simply asking, guys, what you need? How I can help you?
I mean, who would have known that President Putin knew so much about cattle, right? Like, this was a top-down decision. This came from Putin. This came from President Putin.
Да не о поголовье идет речь. У нас голов много, мяса мало было всегда в Советском Союзе. Вот в чем все дело. И мясные...
When the Soviet Union fell, there were shortages across the board. People were hungry and they started slaughtering their cattle in huge numbers. The number of cattle in Russia plummeted. And so when Putin took over, he at some point decided to rebuild that cattle herd. And not just to feed Russians, but to give Russia geopolitical power.
How much?
Well, according to some, it's going to give them more strength than all their oil reserves and all of their weapons do.
Of course, it's food. It's become the second oil, or first, much more powerful than oil. And in the future, food will be driving the world. It's for sure, and will be giving political strength to Russia, much more than weapons and other things. In the future, for Russia, driver will be agriculture. I mean, we will feed all the world.
As food and water become more precious, countries are looking to grab up that resource for themselves, whether it's to wield power or whether to make sure they're feeding their people. With us, the journalist, she's up in Minneapolis. And so the question is, what countries are doing this?
Where are they doing it? And how are they doing it? And is this going to work out well for the world? As I began pulling on threads, one thread and then another thread, information just kept falling into my lap. And at some point, I was swimming in it. And the only way I was going to be able to parse it through and tell the big story, I needed a team.
Hi.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Hello.
Come on in.
I was in the Marine Corps Reserves from 2007 to 2014. And after that, I was a traveling videographer. And that's where I heard about this project. I thought it was about food security and national security. And so I was just super interested in that, being able to get in the dirt and see who are the companies, who are the countries, who are the actors. It's something that needs to be done, and if we didn't, that would say more about us and who we are as journalists and as people if we didn't pursue it, if we didn't do everything in our power to investigate it and to bring those truths to light.
And when you say the future is now, how do you...
The future is food riots. The future is complete instability because of inequities with access to food and water. All I knew was Untitled Food and Water documentary.
Threatening violence because of water scarcity?
I thought maybe this is through the Center for Investigative Reporting. There might be more to it than that. Turns out there was. He had me looking into companies listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, mercenaries, these shadow worlds that I hadn't operated in before, this sort of follow the money. Very rich and very influential people are preparing. They're securing their water. They're securing their access to food for themselves and their families for generations. I first learned about that when we were looking into attending the Global Ag Conference in New York, which is essentially all the major agricultural investors around the world come together in New York and just essentially talk about how to divide up some of the last remaining farmland on Earth. As our reporting deepened and we're looking all over the world, we're seeing it's not just China, it's not just Saudi Arabia, not just Russia, it's the United States too.
Every century is characterized by a key commodity, empire commodities. So in the 1500s, you had spices, 1600s, sugar, 1800s, cotton, 1900s, hydrocarbons. And the 2000s are going forward, I think it's really about water. For instance, if you focus on China, China does not have enough water to feed its population. The reason that they are such large food importers is that they are importing food as a proxy for water. So our way is basically buying farmland, and we want to make sure that we're focusing on areas that are water rich and that can sell crops to areas that are water poor. So in 2018, we purchased a farm in southwest Arkansas that is 25,000 acres in size. And to put that in perspective, that is close to 2 times the size of Manhattan. Look, so a property of this size is enough to feed the corn consumption of Hong Kong for 2.5 years.
Our guys in New York, the way I see it, their job is to raise the money, manage it for the investment side. My job is to manage the asset.
Who have you heard that the potential buyers are?
That's an Edward question on that. That's an Edward question.
So who would lease this farm? Well, it could be any number of large farmers. There are some very large farming operations out there. Or it really could be, it could even go down to food buyers or food security agents of governments.
So this is Wall Street, big money, operating all over the United States, leasing land to foreign countries.
He's one of the original people that saw this coming. Edward Hargroves manages $750 million in farmland investments.
The joy about Arizona is in the certain areas which you have unrestricted water access. Arizona is one of the few places that you can have that privilege. We have a farm that we've been developing for the past few years. It's about 5,000 acres, growing alfalfa that's exported out to the UAE.
Wall Street sees the same thing that these big, powerful countries see. They see increasing demand, decreasing supply. And what does that mean? That means profits.
What do you do about the depleting aquifers? What do you tell the small farmers who see their wells going dry?
You know, certainly I empathize with, the water scenario, the fact that, when you get asked questions, are we exporting our water to somewhere else in the world? And, of course, ultimately the answer is yes. And it's a hard, question to navigate on, what is right and wrong, the value between commerce and sustainability. The US is the greatest exporter of food in the world. If the US was to stop exporting, we would have Armageddon. Absent our product, you'd have World War, absolute World War.
The U.S. government regulates the export of technology very rigorously for national security interest. Okay. Should our food and water not fall under similar consideration? So, is it possible to regulate that? That's a deeply philosophical, academic type of question. I will tell you, as a practical matter, while the policy experts are debating, whoever needs the water and has guns is going to go after it and get it.
I started addressing the topic of water as a national security issue in 2011. The CIA looks ahead 25 and 50 years. And when they saw that that equation with water was going to change and potentially dramatically, that made them sit up and listen.
It's unusual to see a group of retired 3- and 4-star admirals and generals talking about this set of issues. Between now and 2050, 2 billion people are going to be added to the planet. The demand for food is going to increase. The amount of arable land is not substantially going to increase. The lack of arable land, useful land, is going to be a serious problem for many countries.
We're going to have over 1 billion people living in countries that face absolute water scarcity. In other words, they're not going to have enough water to meet their domestic, their economic, their environmental needs. And these countries are going to be at a greater risk of fragility, a greater risk of failure.
The famous quote about 9 meals away from chaos, there's a lot of truth to that. It's all about power, really. And food is a very obvious and central way to wield power.
I had somebody within the U.S. intelligence community say to me that the 20th century had OPEC, a few countries that controlled the world's oil supply. In the future, we're going to have FoodPEC, a few countries that control the world's food supply.
For years and generations, wars have been fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water.
There's a process called red teaming. And that's, you become like the devil. You become the very worst kind of enemy, that you could possibly imagine. And this is used in war games. If I were to red team the U.S. food system to do serious damage, I'm not gonna have the war they're ready for. I'm gonna go for something that really just sits us back on our heels and we're out of commission. And I've joked with people that would be trashing Netflix, making your bank account read 00.00, and messing with our food supply. For example, there is a very defined period of time where those combines have to get out and work basically 24 hours a day. And they're smart and they're generally unsecured. It's amazing technology that has not been secured against hacks. Nobody ever thought about the hacks. So stop the combines for 3 weeks. It would be a disaster for the American economy.
Some of the best military and intelligence minds, this is like 3- 4-star generals, intelligence from Britain and the US, like experts in their field. actually come together and do simulations where two countries are in a massive conflict over water.
We need to take decisive military action. We show our people that we're prepared to take action to get them the access to the resources that they deserve.
How do you think that's going to end once we have taken over the dam? Do we destroy the dam? How do you see this ending?
You can't hold a dam on the ground with a helicopter. So how are you going to hold it, and how many people are you going to lose? Surely you've done that modeling.
These are the things I'm hearing from sources. You know, the experts, the people in the know on food and water. That these are the drivers of conflict and war in the future.
The most original human interaction in many cases is the rise to violence. Reduction in resources that comes from climate change, comes from changes to the environment, may, and in our case, will lead to conflict. Humans will rise to violence if they have nowhere else to go. If they have nothing else to do, they move to violence. Not always, not inevitably, but very often.
Climate change can mean that some areas are going to get not enough water and some areas are going to get too much water. But the net of that is less food. It's less arable land. And although climate change has been in the conversation, you know, what's not really being talked about is what some of the most powerful people are doing with that knowledge. And we're not seeing the global community taking concrete steps to solve this. What we're seeing in the background is countries beginning to grab up those final resources for themselves. And a lot of this, it's happening in the shadows, quietly, away from the public eye.
So, does this bring us to the Trove?
I mean, the Trove is something that we, want to make sure that we're being secure about talking about the Trove.
You feel secure about talking about it?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know how the other team members felt, but I think once you realize what the Trove is and what we're working on, I don't know how, it creates a sense of insecurity in your life.
Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Where are we going?
We're gonna go and we'll go into Kevin's office.
Okay, cool.
I'll show you. We have an exciting development.
Yeah.
Treasure trove.
Yeah, in there. That's an air gap?
That's air gapped.
Okay.
So we got it yesterday. We moved it to this machine, but I figured I'll kind of just show you a little bit of what we got and.
Yeah. What is it? I want to know.
So let's. I'm just gonna close the door here.
All right.
So a source who I've been talking to for quite some time finally kicked over.
Did they email, by the way? Okay.
Hand delivery.
Okay. Good.
Thousands and thousands of.
Oh, wow. Oh, fucking A. All right.
And
thousands of.
10,000 plus. Okay. I have to go through it all still, but we're talking thousands and thousands. And they include attachments, prospectuses, drafts.
This is the whole company? It's not one particular person's email?
We have basically the company's emails for about a 1 year period.
Okay.
And.
All right.
Can you tell us how you got it?
I can talk, I can describe vaguely how I got this information. I have a source who hinted that they might have something I'd be interested in. And that started a 2-year dance of me learning a little bit more about what they had, a little bit more about what they have. Oh my God, do they really have that? Holy shit, I think they have that. Oh my God, I have it.
And that computer has never been on the internet?
We wiped it clean.
Okay.
We physically ripped out its Wi-Fi,
Okay.
and then we put glue in the Ethernet.
Okay. All right. Wait, what is this map?
This was just.
Okay, this is how they're dividing up Africa?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And these are their investment opportunities. So, of course, the usual stuff, minerals and oil, and smack dab in the middle, food.
So just like a bunch of really interesting characters. People, lots of military folk, lots of veterans.
You know, we'd been trying to figure out who else was grabbing up food and water and where they were doing it. And that's when this fell into our lap. I don't know what point the team started calling it the Trove, but it was the way we could just, you know, securely talk about what we had.
The connections.
Right, yeah, so we'll show you. Nate, can we talk about the Trove?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so the Trove is a collection of over 10,000 documents that were leaked to Nate that are the internal communications of Eric Prince's Frontier Resources Group. That is his venture that he started after Blackwater.
Members of the committee, my name is Eric Prince, and I am the chairman and CEO of the Prince Group in Blackwater, USA.
Blackwater, the secretive private army that for critics came to represent the ugliest face of American power.
Blackwater, we have to question in this hearing whether it created a shadow military of mercenary forces that are not accountable to the United States government or to anyone else.
He's been accused of getting rich off of the deeply unpopular war in Iraq, but he says his critics have it all wrong.
Did your people ever kill innocent civilians?
It's entirely possible.
The CIA declined to comment on its association with Prince.
Eric Prince is a super divisive person. Prince's sister is Betsy DeVos, former Secretary of Education. He's a former Navy SEAL, so he's a highly trained, skilled soldier. He then hired a bunch of highly skilled, trained soldiers to do those things in Iraq and Afghanistan for the U.S. government. It became a very lucrative and large business. He then sold that company.
Because you're still in business, yes?
Not in government contracting business.
You don't
No.
work with the United States government anymore?
I sold the whole thing, I'm done.
So what do you do?
I started a private equity fund, and we invest in energy, mining, agriculture kind of things in Africa.
Get the fuck, can I tell you something?
So you have Eric Prince's, one of the most notorious mercenaries on the planet. You have thousands of his emails.
Correct.
Is this why you check phone? Is this why?
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is the part of the story that increasingly makes us think that all of our communications are hacked. Because there's no bigger story I can see to work on that will impact more people than this story. And there's no story I've worked on that has this amount of wealth behind it. And there's no story that I've worked on that has this amount of like mercenary guns behind it. And there's no story I've worked on that has like this level of spycraft technology behind it. But I'm always going to operate under the assumption that I'm hacked.
Can I ask a question here? So he's on an unencrypted wireless mic.
What's that? Yeah.
You're on an unencrypted wireless mic.
Yeah.
So that not be happening.
Eric Prince started this company called Frontier Resource Group, right, to invest in land in Africa. Well, we have the company emails for about like a 1-year period where, you know, we can see that they're looking at possible farm deals in Africa. And Eric Prince doesn't work for free, right? I mean, his client list historically has been some of the most powerful people, the most powerful governments in the world. So we expect these emails are going to become a playbook for how people are looking to grab up food and water. Imagine somebody wants to go and start a farm. What do you think that they do, right? They go buy tractors, they go do this, they do that, they do farmer stuff. But what is Eric Prince talking about in these emails? He's talking about things like having a robust defensive capability around a farm. Like these are the kind of things that Eric Prince is looking at when he's going into these regions.
So it says area by hectare.
Why is somebody whose background and expertise is fighting wars, like, what value do they bring to the farms, right? Like, why? I mean, it's like a who's who. It's like the MVPs of the mercenary world, right?
Right.
And the answer from our reporting is because this stuff has become the point of conflict.
Hey, Captain Man, sorry, some technical difficulties with Zoom here, but I think I can hear you now.
We were told that mercenaries wouldn't talk to us.
There we go. Hey, greetings.
But, you know, we were able to get these folks on the line. But we were actually surprised by the candor in which they spoke. And they warned us how some mercenaries operate and what some of them are up to now.
The whole story of why Africa looks the way it does today, which obviously has a lot to do with the colonial era, a lot of that has to do with what we would now call PMCs.
Private military corporations.
So what happened with the Equatorial Guinea situation? What were you asked to do and how did that turn out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was asked to overthrow the regime.
Simon Mann is former British military who was hired to overthrow the government of Equatorial Guinea. He ended up being arrested and spending time in an Equatorial Guinea prison. You know, so we figured if anyone knows the inner workings of the mercenary world, it's this guy.
I mean, is that possible? Is Eric Prince investing in agriculture in Africa?
Yeah, I think he is. I mean, I know Eric. Eric's a friend of mine. They know that Africa represents this enormous untapped resource. They also know that it's not for the faint-hearted. So if you're going to go and do stuff in Africa, you need aeroplanes, you need logistics, you need trucks, and you're going to need security. Enter Eric.
I think Iraq glamorized the EMT industry somewhat. All of a sudden, there were tens of thousands of these people running around in Iraq as private security consultants. Big players such as Eric Prince with Blackwater is probably the most prominent. But that day's come and gone, and the opportunities are not there for people to get those sorts of contracts anymore. And so I guess the issue is where are the hot spots, and most of them are in Africa at the moment.
Africa has 50 to 60% of the remaining arable land left in the world that hasn't been quote unquote farmed. That doesn't mean that it's just sitting there without people on it. It's peopled. People are farming it. They're farming it for their food, for their lives, to feed their children. In a lot of these places, I mean, these are these people's ancestral lands. They were born there, their parents were born there, their grandparents were born there. They don't have deeds. You don't have deeds to the land you've owned for time immemorial.
There's always a problem in Africa where you don't really have ownership of land necessarily in the same way that we would see it. There's no deeds. There's a village over there. This is where they graze their cattle. Well, now you're not going to be able to graze your cattle, and maybe we're going to have to move you. That potentially is a great problem.
And what if there's an uprising?
Well, that's where we come in.
To be a good investor in Africa, it's not just about having your resources and you go and buy or lease land. It is logistics. You're moving into areas where nobody has gone before. So you need people who have experience and no hesitation to use weapons, who can ensure movement of whatever resources are needed. And then you need connections with the political elite.
Okay, let's see.
You still sound okay on our end.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a separate microphone here. I think in areas where there's very weak rule of law and very little international media attention, it's a wild, wild west. Real experts in this field, you've got to go around and do things like make bribes and keep order.
One of the questions I always have is, why does a community give up their land, right? And as you're going in through the emails, there's answers in there. In the emails, they write, so the price for us will be very low. It depends how many gifts we grant the village chief.
And I think you'll always find somebody out there to give their clients whatever they want if the price is right.
Because we know that they focus, when they're trying to pitch all these banks, like Credit Suisse and JP Morgan, they're focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. So we know that that's where they're looking. It's like the places, the frontier markets.
We can see in the emails back in 2012 that they've charted out what areas have the best water and the cheapest land. And in the Trove, they make it super clear. That place is Zambia. And I'd been to Zambia before in 2017 on a previous reporting trip. And so, you know, I reached back out to my contacts. I set it up for us to go back so we could see, you know, what this looks like for the people who are living in the spaces being grabbed up.
It's fine. It's fine. Oh, she wants the,
Yeah, the invitation letter. Okay. So, of course. Let me just get my...
And you saw, ma'am, that we have the business visa stamped here?
Yes, I know. So far, so
Yeah,
good.
they've taken our paperwork and they've pulled us aside and are making us stand here and jump through some extra hoops. I think it's going to be fun.
Who gave you authority to board?
Sorry, what was the question?
Who gave us authority to board?
The Zambian embassy, yeah. This is from the Zambian embassy. Do you want that? No.
At that point, this woman took all of our passports. She escorted us to a room in the back, which ultimately became, you know, a detention room.
Sad news.
Yeah, but not good, not cheap and put white.
On that previous trip to Zambia in 2017, I had met a human rights attorney, a guy named Brig, who was helping people fight back against their land being grabbed.
Not kufumia chonsa kai kuna faikole, kata. Hii size ino. Then wakachena ko pano. Pano. Then watampa.
With essentially nothing, Brig pushed and shoved and fought his way into university and then into law school and then ultimately into Georgetown. And this is a person who could have done anything. And instead, he just went back to fight for the people. On my first trip, Brig had taken me up to Serenge to meet families, to meet people that had been kicked off of their land.
What can you tell us what happened to his house?
Kai kule bayishiretewa fe kumusungukusa. Bayishiretewa fe kumusunguati. Imwe. Nwempanga nali stafumeni kuno. Kusaye bafye kugula fe nani kani kubula fye tractor. Tampeni kulonga lero line fipelero line nali stayino empanga. Ayishire fe na tractor pale kusala ndafa timwe. Lero line ni lero line. Lero line ino ine de mufumepo.
This white man just came with a tractor and said, now, this is my land. You have to move out.
Nobody consulted them, nobody told them, nobody paid them or compensated.
The only help they received is this tent from the government. Since then, there's no one who is helping them. Okay, they can see, this is where they live, this is where they sleep. So these are the provisions for housing that were given by the government.
How long ago did this happen?
Okay, ntange sibapo pano to ikala poko ni 5 years to akumanya hapa. Ulu na isire fie kuno to aisa to apulira apo munsi ya timuti epo to aike.
And when they arrived here, they just slept under a tree with their
Papitira fiansi ku isi nono ka kamwana kaliso.
As a result of the code of staying in the under the tree, the small child died.
ukukonka pona futi bene basulutani twaikere kwa timyenshi ili 4 abene basulutani wapano pamuchi nabo baonaika nomba pano ndedira okuchula ndechiula ne muntu ndedira na mayo ndedira mayo buchusi mayo ubuchusi mayo ubuchusi ndedira ubuchusi ndechula ine.
She used to have a house, now she's sleeping like this. It's telling her to say, wait, there's some help is gonna come.
We know everyone here doesn't have anywhere to go. Everyone doesn't have anywhere to go. So that's what we are trying to protect, to ensure that people find somewhere to go properly. It's the same pattern of colonization. What we are seeing really is a new scramble for Africa. The only difference, as he explained, at that time they were scrambling for mineral, but this time around they are scrambling for brand.
What we're hearing is that these are white farmers that are kicking them off their land. And so I begin to dig into it, and these guys are backed by LLCs. But then that LLC in Zambia will be owned by another LLC that is actually registered in an offshore company in Mauritius or the BVIs or the Cayman Islands. And that's a dead end. It's like a Russian doll of LLCs and LLCs. And the more we dig, the more it becomes clear that could be owned by anybody. You know, and that's what the Trove emails have begun to show us, how investors structure these deals to hide who is behind them. And what Briggs shows us is the human cost of these hidden deals.
Is it okay if we answer this phone call, sir? Come again? Is it okay if we answer this phone call?
Yes, fine. Thank you.
So we'd been sitting in the room for some time when one of the crew members pointed out that there was a piece of paper on a police bulletin board right behind my head.
Right there, smack dab on it, was all of our names and passport numbers. They were definitely waiting for us.
What's going on now, Nate?
We're getting kicked out. Apparently intelligence, because our reporting is a national security threat. This is what we've been told.
I called people I knew from U.S. intelligence, and I called people in Zambia, and talked to whoever I could to try to piece together why it was that we were getting kicked out of the country.
Yeah, hi, Ambassador. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just
Sorry about what happened last time.
thank you. Yeah, it was disappointing to get so close.
We got the paperwork, you know, Emma specifically got the paperwork that showed, I mean, I'm just going to say it, they basically said that we were hostile to the state, that we were basically enemies of the state.
I was not given properly.
I see. We had business visas and we also had media credentials.
The press passes were issued improperly, and you advised, and the airline was advised.
But they were the ones that told us that we could.
Should have been done properly.
Okay.
But that's what I'm just saying. In case there's an issue, you can do that.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Ambassador. You have a good day.
Okay.
Right. So our sources are telling us that we got kicked out because of our reporting on food and water. And we don't know who pushed the Zambian government to kick us out. And we might not ever know. And we're still trying to figure out who's the big money behind grabbing up, land in Africa. And we're calling people, emailing people, and just getting blocked. Just nobody wants to talk. He's a ghost, right? I mean, I don't think he'll ever talk to us. I think 2 words to us, he'll speak with "fuck you," "fuck off," right? And so I think we have to find somebody who was there with Frontier Resource Group.
I think Greg Smith is actually one of the ones that is most likely to talk.
Greg Smith is in a lot of emails. He's somebody with a military background, also a finance background. This is a guy right at the center of things. He came in, he joined them in their effort to grab up resources in Africa. They were working together. Yeah, Eric Prince and Greg Smith were working together. And then at some point, he says he didn't like what Eric Prince was doing.
Well, would it work for us to come out and sit down with you the end of this month?
First, it went really well. He said he would talk to us. And then one day, when maybe a week or 2 before we were set to fly out and meet him.
This is another tweet that came from Greg Smith that said, just a heads up to friends and journos looking into Eric Prince. The word is Eric is using NSO or a similar technology to track a bunch of comms. Might want to look into new devices or have yours scrubbed 2016 all over again.
And also we see a tweet from Greg Smith, warning journalists, that Prince might be trying to hack their phones. Nate, I've decided not to participate in the documentary. Please cancel any plans you have made to come out here. Regards, Greg. Doesn't want to be interviewed.
Why?
He didn't say. He hasn't responded to my messages or calls since, so I don't know.
I know last time we spoke, you said you weren't interested in being in the documentary, and I totally hear that. He said I trust no one but myself right now.
What about the Admiral in D.C.?
So he's another potential person, and I reached out to him last week, and I sort of, did the good evening, sir. As a former Marine, he's like, I don't have anything to do with them anymore, and I won't talk about that. So.
Let's add in Dorian's.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice message.
Connect with you, and I just wanted to make sure I gave you every opportunity to comment. So I think in any investigation, you hit a low point, right? Where you're swimming in information, you're trying to make sense of it.
In order to tell the story right, you need to tell it on this massive global scale.
That's right. It's all interconnected now.
It's all connected.
It's like every thread could be a story, every thread could be something, potentially.
Yeah.
If you do enough digging, and it's hard to not feel overwhelmed.
And in a story like this, you're also dealing with the fact that you're witnessing the callousness of the way we're seeing people treat other humans. It gets to you after a while.
So here's one of the examples of email I came across from Sean Rump. Sean Rump is his right-hand man.
Yeah.
If you come across some run-over, shot, or otherwise fucked up native, and this is hard for me to even say out loud, but obviously I'm reading from this. So if you come across some run-over, shot, or otherwise fucked up native, say a prayer for them. You don't help injured, bleeding people in Africa. AIDS, Hep A, B, and C, and the myriad of other ailments that keep their life expectancy around 42 is to be avoided at all costs. People die in the third world. It's Darwin's selection at its most pure. It was really upsetting, and I think that sort of indicates what they're...
Yeah, it's infuriating. They can't come forward and say, we're going to Africa to build farms to feed Africans. It's like you just said you don't give a fuck about Africans.
David!
Hello! How's it going?
So this is the galaxy, what we call the galaxy. And basically it is all of the connections that we've found so far from looking through the trove.
David is like the wizard behind the curtain that nobody ever sees.
And so this shows who was communicating with who on the emails.
He took, this trove of emails, of Eric Prince's company's emails, with all of these attachments, and worked with the CIR data team to, put it all into a database that we could search. And then David, on top of that, built this incredible visualization tool.
And that allowed us to build out some of these other connections. And from this, we saw that Eric Prince was tied to his company, Frontier Resources Group.
After months and months, we had a breakthrough. Frontier Resources Group, they had a silent partner that one of my teammates specifically had that eureka moment where she was like, I think I figured out who's secretly backing them.
Something called RG, I stumbled upon an email where they were saying that it was tied to RG, these initials, and that it was something that the boss didn't want anybody to talk about. And so once I started doing some searches, found this email called Royal Group with Sheikh Tahnoon's name in it.
This is Sheikh Tahnoon, brother of the ruler of the United Arab Emirates, a member of the royal family.
Sheikh Tahnoon was the founder of First Gulf Bank, now First Abu Dhabi Bank. He is behind ADQ, which is a huge sovereign wealth fund.
One of the most powerful men in the world. That's his backer. Runs the national security for the Emirates. He's building companies to dig into spy tech, intelligence efforts. This is a bigger-than-life guy. And Sheikh Tahnoon's companies, they've gone on a huge buying spree. They've bought one of the largest grain traders in the world, or a big portion of it. And they're buying companies that own food and water all over the world. When we figured out it was Tahnoon, it again was the pattern re-emerging. It was another water-stressed country that was going to another part of the world to grab food and water resources. And this time, it wasn't Arizona. It was all across Africa. The question is, why does Tahnoon need Eric Prince? We've reached out to Eric Prince. I've gone to his offices in Hong Kong. We've reached out to Sheikh Tahnoon, and we haven't been able to get anywhere with it. But we found somebody who was willing to talk to us, somebody who was on the inside.
So you're going to drive through, go straight up.
It's kind of beautiful. Yeah, that's a pretty nice fucking spread. Look, I'm going to go into business with Eric Prince.
So this is a souvenir from my special forces friends who are working in Syria. And I asked him for an ISIS flag.
Robert Young Pelton is a writer, he's an entrepreneur. He even has run, intelligence networks in Africa.
They just loosed off a few artillery shells at us, but...
He shows up in the emails. He's in the emails. Him and Eric Prince worked together for years. At one point they have a falling out. They even at one point sued each other. He's written books about the Blackwater guys. He knows this world well.
It's wrong to be obsessed with Eric Prince because it's kind of like, how did he get into the room? Like, who let him into the room? And so you got to remember, the UAE energized Eric Prince. So I've known Eric, 10 years, I guess, right? Or no more than that. And he's gone through different phases. He did something very interesting. Well, and that is basically, what's the most valuable thing to the wealthiest people? Security, right? Sheikh Tahnoon is responsible for the security and well-being of the kingdom. That's a very heavy responsibility to have. Eric was hired to help build a mercenary army for the Emirati royal family.
People in the national security sphere, like Tahnoon, they know that this is a political stability issue. Ultimately, what they're controlling is not having a bunch of hungry, pissed off citizens. This is what people tell us over and over again is what happened with the Arab Spring.
This is what popular uprising looks like. It appears to be the end for Tunisia's president after 23 years in power.
So the Arab Spring was a key time
in the last decade for agriculture in general, and it was the result of shortages of available food supply around the world.
Unrest is spreading across the Arab world.
Now to the growing unrest in the Middle East.
Protests that toppled President Hosni Mubarak in Egypt are now ripping through the Middle East with anti-government demonstrations in Bahrain, Yemen, and most significantly, in Iran.
The political fires that burned across North Africa, many say were kindled in Russia last summer. Extreme drought triggered wildfires and destroyed a third of the country's wheat harvest. Russia refused to export the rest of its harvest. Markets panicked and food prices shot up.
When Russia shut down its wheat exports, they needed to make sure they had enough grain at home so people wouldn't slaughter their cattle. They were protecting Putin's idea of building up that cattle herd, the cattle industry that they were importing American cowboys for. And when they did that, it sent global grain prices through the roof.
Meanwhile, the revolution in Egypt has sparked a new wave of protests across the region.
Anytime you talk to somebody in the intelligence community, they always say, like, it's never just one thing, right? It's a combination of things. But in this case, our sources are telling us that the thing that pushes it over the cliff is food prices. Food prices spiking. All across the Middle East, countries saw what happened in the Arab Spring. They saw what happened when food prices spiked, and they said, we need to control our food if we want to control our political stability.
So this email is on the last day of the Trove, September 25th, 2012. And it says he's the fourth richest man in China. We're gonna have dinner together at our mutual friend's home in Shenzhen.
So we had our breakthrough. We figured out who his financial backer was. And at the end of the Trove, we can't see which of those big farm deals, if any, they finalized, but we can see that they're going in search of a new client, and we follow that path to Hong Kong. When we start researching there, we found out he's got a new backer, China. And we're back where the entire investigation started.
Frontier Service Group, a Hong Kong company, will provide fresh capital, know-how, and it will tie it into our logistics expertise. We have a significant logistics operation that operates from South Africa.
Well, I think the takeaway here is that the world's wealthiest governments are turning to Erik Prince to help them get into Africa, right? To help them use his muscle and know-how from working in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to get resources out of Africa. And so we started looking into Erik Prince's new company, and he's got a new partner, Johnson Co., a well-known Hong Kong financier with ties to the Chinese government. And around 2014, at the same time, when they became partners, Johnson Co. had helped create another new company, Guangqi Science, which had started doing classified research for the Chinese government.
The development of a jetpack that, based on current testing, will have over 30 minutes flight capability and an altitude up to 1,000 meters.
This company, Guangqi Sciences, bills itself as helping within the African market.
With potential usage spanning search and rescue,
So Erik Prince's partner was part of a company that was designing jetpacks.
They were billing these things as could be used for executive extraction. So, if a executive was at a refinery or at a big corporate farm and people rose up and there was unrest and there was an attack, you could get into your jetpack and get out. They're doing all kinds of things. They're doing invisibility cloaks.
It works by bending the light around an object. Imagine what that could do for a sniper.
Secret classified work for the Chinese military. You just gotta remember, I started looking at food and water. I started looking at pigs, if you really want to get down to it. Why and how China purchased 1 in 4 American pigs. How I went from pigs to invisibility cloaks, and just following it, I found myself back in China. Yeah, and it, it kind of makes sense because China is one of the most powerful countries in the world. But we know that China, the one thing that they really need, food and water resources.
The truth is, China's economic growth strategy is non-sustainable. China is running out of water in the north. And without water you can grow.
Hangzhou, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us. I appreciate it. Can you just say in basic
terms what the Great Famine is?
I guess it always has been considered as a taboo subject in China for political reasons. Inside China, officially, these 3 years is called either called 3 years of natural disaster, but outside China is being termed as Great Chinese Famine. It happened between 1959 and 1961. Regards to how many people who died, the number varies from a few million to 30 plus million. Xi Jinping has so many occasions mentioned his personal stories. He said that when he was young, he actually ate the raw pork. These experiences has led the Chinese leaders to believe that food security is the #1 priority of governance in China.
One thing that I saw in your book that I didn't know was that during the Great Famine, the U.S. had when millions of people were starving in China, the U.S. had an embargo against China, so they wouldn't let food go into China.
Embargo was imposed before the Chinese famine. I think it's because of it's part of the American effort to contain the entire communist bloc. I think for which reason that is very understandable. They have deeply in their mind they don't trust the international market. In crises like this, all countries basically have to look after themselves. When you don't have enough food, there's a big famine, money is useless.
The leadership of China remember a period of dark, deep deprivation, and they don't ever want to go back there. And they know that their political futures and the stability of the country is based on being able to feed their people. It's become part of their 5-year plan, their national security strategy to get food and water from around the world. And this is what we're seeing. This is the grab. A scramble for food and water in the 21st century. Slowly, we're seeing a massive consolidation of who controls the food and the water in the world. If we know that hungry people are unhappy people, and unhappy people rise up, it's kind of a no-brainer to make the connection that there might be conflict. And this is what we're starting to see all across Africa. People fighting back when their land is taken. Just now we're getting reports from Brig that people are rising up, that there are these incidents now of conflict that are beginning to bubble up. People are beginning to push back.
Tell me what happened here.
I'm told what happened here is that the community cut this tree to block the bulldozers from the farm across to trespass into their land. They have called me here to show me that they need help with this situation, which is beyond their power, control, and means.
And then we got an update from Brig, who had visited his homeland, his ancestral land where he grew up, and it was happening there too.
I received a text message from a colleague, a friend, that our land, including your family land, has been taken. How that was done, with all these residences around, all these schools around, is just something hard for me to understand. If I was not going to raise and help my community, I think it was going to be like almost a betrayal. You see? And then our graveyard. My stepmother, I was given to as my mother, so she was really so special to me. It's something that I've never thought in my life and in my career representing people who are facing displacement, that one day our burial site will actually be taken. It's really, really, really sad. It breaks my heart.
And they're trying so hard to get the world to pay attention to what's happening to them. You know, they're using their cell phones to document what's happening, to show the world in real time what's going on. We don't always know who the investors were there. China, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Wall Street, Eric Prince, you know, we don't know. But we can see the damage being done on the ground.
Yashi, yumufukire. So rero babati kukutaba. Tabesi na baroya babati kukutabe. So bakoti baranda ati nishiri aba fya kuranda fya. Fya chashara nomba upingus. So nga kwapo isha ifyo. Then bakatupera obusho. Yo bakatupera upingu. I look at it like it's burying their heads in the sand, because some of the same thing that decision they are making now, displacing people A, B, C, D. People don't forget about land issues. The decision they are making now may actually haunt some people later, because land issues people don't actually forget. It can spark wars and actually conflicts.
This is the idea of being, you know, these quote-unquote frontier markets, right? They're very far from watching eyes. These things kind of happen in the shadows, and these are ultimately, they can become just forgotten people until they get pissed enough, until they rise up, until there's a big enough conflict that the world takes note for a little bit. One of the surprising things we learned was that Somali pirates came from fishermen that had their fishing stocks depleted. Foreigners came in, they trawled all of the fish out of those regions, and so the Somalis that had been making their livings off of going out and fishing and selling that fish didn't have that income anymore. And it was an incentive for them to become quote-unquote pirates.
More than 90 ships have been attacked this year, and at least 36 have been hijacked, according to the International Maritime Bureau.
To defend themselves, shipping companies are now spending close to $1 billion on private guards, who are now waging a largely hidden mercenary war against pirates.
You know, where does Daesh or ISIS or ISIL pop up? It pops up in places where it's, you know, tough to get by, generally speaking.
I swear to the Almighty God, you will not see them again until after you release our people that you captured.
That's a reality in too many places. Boko Haram in northeast Nigeria, the Lake Chad region, Al-Shabaab in Somalia. You can go around the continent and identify different extremist groups that prey upon deprivation.
They are not happy.
There are ongoing conflicts in Yemen, in Libya, Mali, Venezuela, of course. It would not be in the best interest of the United States to add to that list. If you follow this trajectory, you may see a world that is essentially unrecognizable. A world war triggered by competition over natural resources doesn't seem that improbable to me. Whether we go to war or not, you know, that's a political decision, right?
Зараз я чек. Ще не викидав.
Super.
We are rolling, guys.
Проведи, хорошо, а я здесь встречу. Давай.
Andre, thank you so much for doing this interview with us. I know it's late in the evening there. So back in 2020, we interviewed Andrei Senchenko, the former deputy chief of staff for the Ukrainian president, when Russia grabbed Crimea in 2014.
This is a Russian invasion, the U.S. says. It has no doubt these are Russian forces and has demanded their immediate withdrawal.
But when Russian forces invaded, the Ukrainian government then built this dam to try and stop the water flow and force the Russians out.
And it turns out that when Russia came over and grabbed Crimea, the Ukrainians were like, cool, well, no water. And there was this decision made by Senchenko. And so, yeah, we were like, well, we got to talk to this guy. So when the Russians entered Crimea, why cut off their water supply?
И мы понимали, что от чего зависим в наибольшей степени Крым, что заставит оккупанта тратить огромные деньги на решение этих проблем. И это в первую очередь вода. И именно с этой целью было принято решение о перекрытии Северо-Крымского канала, по которому подается Днепровская вода в Крым.
So by the time we talked to him, the water to Crimea had been shut off for 7 years. The agriculture had been decimated. They were trying to put in desal plants. They were trucking water over. And it had become so expensive for the Russians that a lot of people were beginning to conjecture that in order to save Crimea, Putin was going to have to invade Ukraine and take control of that water canal.
I find interesting, just real quick, is that the Crimea buildup is getting pretty intense now. There's like 80,000 troops. Yeah.
So Mal's tracking this. Mal's tracking this dispute over water between Russia and Ukraine, because this was a case where tensions over water could spark an international war.
But yeah, they build up these troops and they're doing exercise and they're bringing in, artillery and.
So less than a year before the Russians invaded, we reach out to Senchenko again because we want to know what he's seeing and what he thinks about it. I'm sorry. Do I understand you correctly? You think the Russians are bluffing, that they're not going to invade and take the canal?
Я б казав так, росіяни постійно тестують, по-перше, Україну з точки зору, наскільки вона готова захищатися, і тестують колективний Захід, в тому числі Сполучені Штати, наскільки вони готові, крім слов підтримки України, все ж таки робити конкретні кроки на підтримку українського суверенітету. Путин хочет быть, если не первым, то и не вторым лидером в мире. Я не знаю, как далеко зашли бы его интересы в противодействии Соединенным Штатам, но, знаете, как они могут быть безграничны. То есть в конечном счете он хотел бы разрушить всех тех, кто представляет для него некую конкуренцию, другие центры силы.
Months-long build-up of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine has turned now into an invasion. The skies over multiple cities, including the capital Kiev, lit up.
These are among the darkest hours for Europe since the end of World War II.
Within the first days of the war, what do the Russians do? They blow up the dam blocking water to the canal. And that gets immediately reported back to Putin.
Северо-Крымский канал наполнен! Днепровская вода сошла! Смерть Бендере!
Reports of Russians seizing Ukrainian cargo ships full of grain and taking it and hauling it back to Russia. One of Ukraine's largest grain silos, blown up. We see this concentration on food, on water, immediately as the war starts. When you see a country that's been talking about creating a grain OPEC or a food OPEC, invading another country that would make it the largest grain exporter in the world, effectively the most powerful food exporting country in the world, This is what security experts are now worried about. They're openly talking about the possibility of Russia using its food supply as a weapon.
The Russian government seems to believe that using food as a weapon will help accomplish what its invasion has not. The consequences of these actions have been devastating. The food supply for millions of Ukrainians and millions more around the world has quite literally been held hostage by the Russian military.
The reality is the Ukraine is the #1 provider of food that WFP, the World Food Program, distributes into the populations in need.
And now the head of the World Food Program has warned that the conflict in Ukraine could send global food prices soaring. The organization
WFP noted that the Russian Federation and Ukraine are responsible for 29% of the global wheat trade, and that any serious disruption of production and exports from the region could push food prices beyond their current 10-year highs. The executive director of World Food Program, he warned that bullets and bombs in Ukraine could take the global hunger crisis to levels beyond anything we've seen before.
We need to understand Ukraine as not just a struggle for democracy, but it is once again a struggle for resources and who owns and controls it.
We're seeing the destitution, the damage this is causing for millions of people around the world. I mean,
You're gonna want to talk to him.
I think it's fair to say that there are people in the United States who are suffering from essentially the same thing. Not at the same scale and not with the same degree of deprivation, but they are watching what was theirs become someone else's and having little or no recourse.
I'm going to show you. This is the pension fund for Arizona State.
Holly's own pension fund. Without her even knowing it, the money that's supposed to fund her retirement is draining the water from her land. And she has no idea. No idea.
So basically, your pension fund funded that takeover that is now Aldahara that's shipping it overseas.
I want to scream right now. That is incredible. Absolutely incredible. Wow. Yeah. Wow. This, and I'd be, there you go, all day long. See it all day long. And what is our state doing? Absolutely nothing. And because you just showed me this, it explains why they're not doing anything, because why would they? They're, to me, it's extremely disturbing, and it, quite frankly, makes me very angry.
In our work, where we have looked at hundreds and hundreds of land deals all over the world, majority of the deals are actually US-based and by European investors. So there's far more in common in the struggles of the dispossessed. You talk about Africa, along with land grab, you have water grab. But if you look at the struggles in the United States, the fight and the struggle is against the same corporations who are taking over land globally. These corporations, of course, are not working for the US government to ensure US food supply. Instead, you have a scenario where the US government or the European governments are working for the corporations. The priority is not the people.
When we talk about a vulnerable population, we are not talking about a particular geography. We're talking about people who lack power and lack access to making the decisions about their own lives. And that's true whether that population is in Arizona or in the Ukraine.
А що я їм скажу? Братішка, я тебе не трогав. Отак і скажу. І ти мене не трогай. Іди в свою Росію. І там, що хочеш, роби.
Rural communities have a fabric,
And so when that land is purchased, if it is managed in a way that is not contributing to the community, that's a sabotage of the community. So it really becomes like a raid. And even though it's legal, it's raiding resources that aren't yours.
People are going to have to ask themselves if this is an intractable movement. If you have some of the wealthiest countries in the world, and you have people's own pension funds that are all behind this movement, like, who's going to stop it? If you're an Emirati, why would you want to stop them? If you were Chinese, why would you want to stop them? Like, you want your country doing these things. And I think it's tough to fault China for making sure that they're going to have enough food and water for their people. Right? That's the purview of a country. The same with UAE and the same with the Saudis, you know? It's the purview of a country to make sure they have the resources that their people want and need.
The capitalist system we've got now permits that because we thought these resources were all endless. It's one of those classic things where the fundamentals have changed very significantly, and we're just operating along like it's business as usual.
You know, the problem isn't countries or people trying to secure their food supply. The problem is how some people in some places are securing their food. Going in and grabbing other people's land, depriving them of a future. Going in and grabbing people's water, sucking their aquifers dry, depriving them of a future. It's problematic in so many ways. It's inequity. It's seeding future conflict. It's destabilizing the world.
We in the developed nations demand huge amounts of food, out of season, whenever we want, and we throw away a third of it. If we didn't say, I want a watermelon in December, then they wouldn't have that pressure, that market pressure to suck up all the water, to make this food for us. All of these problems always end up with an inability to accept the responsibility by developed nations.
We have overconsumed. We have overdrawn on resources that were meant for future generations.
The West often looks to other countries, right? Like, there's reports that have come out that said, if China's meat consumption continues, there's no way we're going to be able to meet our climate change goals. And that might be true, but it's said by the West, who consumes almost twice as much meat per capita as does China. And yet, you know, there's this finger pointing at the developing world for increasingly eating meat. But it's like, yeah, but they're just getting closer to eating your diet, right? You know, like, you know, maybe you look in. Maybe the solution is inside your borders, you know?
This is the master plan. This is how it's gonna work.
One of the points of hope is that the same people that are identifying the problems, that are saying the future looks really bleak, there's always an asterisk, unless we do, and there's a solution.
What if we use, instead of grass, we use bacteria, and instead of cows, we use fungi, and you can do that in 3 days. In theory, you could make food out of thin air.
So we have people from the defense sector talking about restructuring the food system. You have Wall Street investors like Edward Hargroves operating big commercial farms who, you know, have kind of done an about face because they saw firsthand what was happening to the soil. And now they're moving into regenerative farming.
Do you feel like you were part of the problem?
So, at the time, you only know what you know, and without, the current, farmland portfolio, we never would have had this opportunity. But we can do better, and we're always going to be looking, to do better across the board.
We know the hungry are the best experts on hunger. We know that the majority of the food that is consumed in the world today, 80% of it, comes from family farmers. We need to invest and smallholder farmers. We need to ensure their seed rights, their land rights, their water rights.
The world produces enough food to feed everybody now properly, and we don't do it. In fact, some people say the world produces enough food today to feed those in 2050 if we were to reshape the food system.
There's enough water in the world to grow enough calories to feed everyone in the world, not just today, but in the year 2050 when there's 9 billion people and when there's 10 billion people. The intelligence community says this is solvable. Engineers say this is solvable. If we solve it.
rimwe bati nga fyachita kwati fyatararako panono kabwera bwi. Okay, now the judgment. You remember I said that you won the case, okay? First, the court found that that was your land, that it was not changed properly from your customary land to whoever got it. So then the court also looked at the destruction of your properties, and it says everything the court agreed with you, say you are supposed to be paid for that.
This is the height of resistance, this is the height of conflict, and their victories. Yes, they're few, they're rare, but we cannot undermine the importance of those victories. History will repeat itself because the model of taking over resources is so unsustainable, it cannot last.
It's always the big question when you're working on a big investigative piece, like when do you call it enough? When do you say, okay, I need to take what we've learned and share it with the public? And I think we're at that point.
Right now I have it scheduled probably.
Whether or not people are gonna give a shit or not, you can't control. What you can control is getting it done, getting the information into people's hands. Then it's up to them. It is pleasant, isn't it?
Yeah.
Talk to you what is the progress, what is the way forward with these people, these squatters that were on the farm, so we can get this stuff sorted out and laid to rest, because the way it's going now, there will be no further investment in this area if people see what is happening here. And people have seen it. They've seen what's happening here. So let's try and get this thing sorted out. Thank you.